I grew up in California, started researching fossil marine mammals and associated sharks and bony fish and seabirds from relatively young deposits along the California coast, and did my master's at Montana State University, where I specialized in fossil preservation. I did my PhD at the University of Otago on early baleen whales, and then since 2015, I've been teaching and doing research here as part of a research fellowship at the College of Charleston and the Mace Brown Museum in Natural History, mostly researching 23 to 30 million year old fossil cetaceans representing the earliest known baleen whales and echolocated dolphins.
So, some people say there's no such thing as a stupid question. Is Megalodon actually extinct?
You ever seen one?
No.
Yeah, nobody has. I've never seen a picture of a live one. I've never seen a dead one. I mean, a freshly dead one. Nobody's ever caught one. All we've got are these teeth and a few vertebrae here and there. And that tells me all you need to know. I mean, we've seen, there's just a new video of a megamouth shark that came out this week. Where's the equivalent footage of, the Meg?
With that, then, what does the current evidence suggest this whole extinction happened? Because I've heard a lot of different ideas just in, my own time growing up and looking at paleo stuff where they're like, oh, the ice age killed them off. The whales just left the area, the supernova thing. Like there's been a lot of different ideas. So what's the current evidence suggest?
So that was an interesting question. Obviously, if you assume it's extinct, which I think is more than fair, given, what we just talked about, it's really a question of when the fossil record ends. And there's a bunch of problems with that. So yes, there's a bunch of different times that have been proposed. So sometimes there are some fossils that look like they're white, and they're from somewhere in the South Pacific, and they're dredged from the seafloor, and they're generally white in color, which led to, proposals that, it's still alive, or, these are very geologically young teeth from the Pleistocene or even the Holocene. And that's just preservation. There's also a few teeth where they have a polymetallic crust on them. These are basically parts of polymetallic nodules. There's a big debate going on in deep sea oceanography right now about polymetallic nodule mining on the deep sea floor. And megalodon teeth, when they're talking about these deep sea strip mines that they're going to be doing, collecting all these nodules that have rare earth elements in them, probably 1 out of 100 of those nodules is actually a megalodon tooth. That's based on some unpublished research. So, there's a lot of these meg teeth from the deep sea floor. When they have this crust on them, we know the rate at which that crust grows. So it's tempting, measure that thickness of crust and calculate based on the known rate of chemical growth, or mineral growth, I should say, how old that specimen is. But you're just measuring the time in which the mineral has been growing. There's probably a period of time where it's not growing. So in reality, what you're measuring is a minimum age. And sure enough, some of these fossils are only like 30 to 70,000 years old, based upon this dating method. But you're only dating part of the time of that fossil's existence. So it's not a very good way of estimating age. For example, you got a car, and I'm thinking back to my time in Boessenecker, Montana. You got a car, it's in April, everything's starting to weather out of the snow. 1 out of every 15 vehicles is covered in 6 feet of snow. And so you're like, I'm going to estimate how long that car has been in the snow. Oh, we got 18 inches. It took X amount of time for that to build up. But part of that's been melted. Maybe not all of it's from the same storm. You're not getting the whole picture, basically. So that was one estimate. There's a paper that came out a few years ago, which our paper made some corrections to, where they estimated the extinction date at about 2 to 2.5 million. And we found widespread errors in that data set that needed to be adjusted. We also took some of the data points and tossed them because we basically felt that including those was affecting the date. And we're talking about fossil records where either the age range was super duper long or artificially adjusted to fit a time boundary, which is fine. You know, for example, the Pliocene epoch goes from 2.5 to 5.3 million. And if a fossil is dated as just Pliocene without any numbers for, you know, it's a numerical analysis that you do to reconstruct the time. So you change Pliocene to 5.3 to 2.5. But if you have something that's Miocene or Pliocene and you give a date that's 16 to 2.5, that's very different. That's a very long period of time. So anything where it had like an age range more than a couple million years, we toss those in favor of more precise dates. And then the supernova is based on that 2.5 million year age extinction estimate. And the supernova happened to be 2.5 million years ago, 2.5, 2.6, something around there. So anyway, we took all these dates. We excluded problem dates or problem occurrences where the dates either were too long or there were problems like it's actually a great white shark tooth. And great white sharks are still around today, so it could be much younger. Or the fossil didn't actually have any locality data. There was one specimen from New Zealand where, if you go back to the original paper from the 70s, the locality was listed as a 150 kilometer section of coastline. Well, there's a lot of different rocks on that coastline. Some of them are much younger than our extinction date. Some are a lot older. So it's best to just exclude that and include only specimens with precise dating. There were other specimens where it was like, it was from this quarry or possibly this one. If it was from this one, we think it is, then this is the date. It's like, well, let's just exclude that. And again, emphasize specimens with precise dating. When we re-looked at all of these, we ended up correcting a lot of these dates. We added a bunch of new ones from the West Coast. And from our West Coast records, we estimated that they're probably going to tell us, you know, an extinction date around 3.6 million. The date between the boundary between the early and the late Pliocene epoch. And we made that prediction based upon the California fossil record in Baja California. And then when we reanalyzed the worldwide data set, we ended up with this beautiful curve that shows a maximum extinction date happening no earlier than roughly 4.0 million years, a peak in the extinction date likelihood at about 3.5 to 3.6, and then a minimum of extinction date at 3.2 million. In other words, possibly extinct as early as 4 million years ago, most likely extinct by 3.6, and certainly extinct by 3.2. So we took a 2 million year long extinction period window and shortened it to 800,000 years. And that's the power of being very discerning when it comes to biochronologic age data and picking only the most precise records.
So that sounds kind of like a really great example of like why it's so important to have like this geologic background in a lot of the paleontology stuff too.
Certainly. Most of that paper was stratigraphy. Very little of it was actual paleontological work.
Yeah, and like 800,000 years is a pretty tight window for a geologic record. Like that's pretty impressive. I just saw the average date when I looked at that paper. So very
good age control before the late Pleistocene.
What would you put as good bounds for size estimates? If you had to put money down on it, what would you bet?
I'm not a betting man, so that's a tough question for me. And I also kind of don't care, as awful as that is. The most conservative estimate is about 15.5 meters. The least conservative estimate is about 20, and they involve different assumptions. The most conservative estimate is based on single tooth measurements and plugging those measurements into equations based off of tooth to body size measurement, or tooth to body size ratios in the modern great white shark. Modern great whites and a lot of modern sharks grow isometrically. That is, they generally have the same body length to tooth size ratio as a juvenile versus an adult. And otherwise, their head and tooth size doesn't change relative to the rest of the body as they grow. A great example of allometry, which is the opposite, is like a human baby, where they've got like this ridiculously inflated balloon head, and then they're, this shrunken body, and then the body gets bigger and grows at a faster rate than the skull grows larger. And that's because, we got big brains. We got sort of a minimum brain size that we need to have in order to be a functioning juvenile. So isometry is what allows us to get at these conservative estimates. The less conservative estimates with body length estimates of like 19 to 20 meters are based on a different set of equations where they took a tooth set, one of the only known tooth sets of a Carcharicles megalodon specimen, where most of the tooth positions are represented. The teeth were not articulated, i.e. in their anatomical position, but this is like a cluster of like 50 or 100 teeth all found in one spot. So that is one shark that died and then rotted. And then those teeth were buried in their final resting place. You can take those out, match the different tooth positions up, because generally speaking, if there's a weird little wrinkle on the root, that'll be reproduced throughout the entire file, which is a single tooth position. The teeth rotate out like that. One shark will have 4 or 5 or more teeth in that same file at one time. So there'll be 4 or 5 teeth that are exact cookie cutter copies of each other. You can, once you figure out each tooth file, you can arrange them from the middle of the jaw to the outer part of the jaw. Some ichthyologists might squabble over, all right, these two should be switched. That doesn't really matter for this, because the method that they use is you take the widths of the teeth and you add them up. And you end up with a measurement approximating the width of the mouth. And that might be better for reconstructing the body length than a single tooth. And then what you can do, what my colleague, Dr. Victor Perez did, they published a paper just a couple months ago where they did this method, and then they generated new equations for each tooth position, and they took the largest known tooth, plugged it back in, and got this horrifying 20-meter estimate. If I was a betting man, I would actually say Dr. Pimiento's estimate from 10 years ago, right about 17 meters. That's the median estimate between the more conservative estimate from the 90s of about 15.5 to 16 meters and the 20-meter estimate. So I'd go with, I think Catalina's right on the money there with about a 17 to 18 meter long shark. That's where I put my money, but only because it's safe.
I mean, no, that's totally fair. Like, it's one of those things with a lot of paleontologists. It seems like when it's one of those kinds of things, they like to be safe on it, right?
Yeah. Now, there's another part, of course, to the conservative estimate from the 90s, and that is it's approximately the same body length known for whale sharks at that time. And, basking sharks don't get much bigger than about, I think, like 12 to 13 meters. And of course, whale sharks get to about 15 to 16 meters, or at least at that time, they were thought that. And so it was thought that about 15 meters was possibly this functional limit or constraint to the maximum body size of a cartilaginous fish. And there are different arguments you can make about bony fish. We don't really have any bony fish that are bigger than about 3 to 4 meters if they're really massive fish, with the exception of like an oarfish. But that thing's like, you know, a big ribbon. So I'm not so sure that something like an oarfish really gets to weigh in much. Very different body shape from a shark. And there are, of course, like 4 meter long tuna that we know of, and like 3 meter long sea bass. And we got the bizarre ocean sunfish. And there are much more gigantic bony fish in the fossil record. They seem, with the exception of things like lead zichthies from the Jurassic of Europe, bony fish seem to have a smaller or body size constraint to their maximum body length in mass, for that matter. And sharks, we think, have a larger one, but it's got to be somewhere. And so part of the reasoning for this 15-meter body length was this functional constraint idea. The problem is that since there have been, and this is actually news to me until I was working on this paper myself on Carcharodontes angustans, one of the reviewers pointed out there are I think 18 to 19 meter long whale sharks that have been known now. And I was like, whoa, there's no way. And I read the paper and it's like, holy cow, that's like there's a whale shark the length of a sperm whale. Bigger than a humpback, almost the same length as a fin whale. Just like shockingly gigantic sharks. And I might be, people talk about fish, they always add a little bit. I might be off by a meter or so. But I think 17 meters was what I read. You can fact check me on that.
Going back to what you were talking about when they used the tooth rows and with that single dead specimen, I always remember when I was talking with Dr. Jenna Ehret, he mentioned that there was some Peruvian specimen that hasn't been published on but looked like an articulated megalodon. Do you have any thoughts on that specimen from what you've seen, or nothing's been published yet, and that's where you leave it?
I've seen some photographs of it, and the fossil is unintentionally hilarious because it's a composite. And there's a big slab, it's actually 2 slabs of rock that are sort of joined in the middle. They obviously had to cut it out in 2 blocks, or so it would seem. The vertebrae that are purported to go with this specimen are only 3 inches in diameter, which is hilarious because that's, about 3 inches. That's like the size of a vertebra of, don't quote me exactly, but probably about a 3 to 4 meter long shark. I take it back, maybe 5 to 6 meters. Not a particularly large shark, like a medium-sized great white, or a really, really large mako might have vertebrae that size. So, and the teeth are full size. So the problem is that there's some evidence of it being a composite. I have no idea if the teeth have been stuck in those positions or not. Nothing's been published about the specimen. It's been, pictures of it have been floating around on the internet now for at least a year or two. So I'm highly suspicious. It's also privately owned, so far as I know. So we may never find out. It may be total faked chimera assemblage of. Actually, we know it's a chimera already. We don't know how much of the articulated teeth are genuine or not. It does, however, look like it has mandibular and platyquadrate cartilages, which are the lower and upper jaws respectively. But the Moroccans make all sorts of stuff out of putty. So, we don't have paleoichthyologists, to my knowledge, have not looked at and confirmed the authenticity of the specimen in person yet.
With the fossil whale, Leviathan.
Leviathan is the pronunciation.
Leviathan. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure it's one of those geology things, like, Mesozoic, Mesozoic.
Yeah, well, in that case, it's they actually named it originally with the English spelling first, Leviathan, but that was preoccupied, and that name is a junior synonym of Mammut americanum, the American mastodon, and then so they found the original Hebrew spelling had not been used yet, so that's why it looks like it says Leviathan, but it's pronounced Leviathan.
That actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, some people are going to ask which one would win in a fight. And I will say, I will fully believe that they probably wouldn't, because they're just not going to try and get involved in that with one another unless they absolutely have an advantage. But since you do mammals and Megalodon, would you have an opinion on that?
They actually did a close relative on that god-awful show Jurassic Fight Club about 13, 14 years ago. Only they used the Japanese species Brygmaphyseter shigensis, which is much smaller. Leviathan, Melvillei, and Megalodon are about the same size. There are a couple of folks who think that Carcharicles Megalodon could have maxed out at about 20 meters. Leviathan, we're looking at about 16 to 17 meters, which is arguably terrifying. Honestly, that fight is going to be 1-in-1 bite either way. So it's whoever bites first. Leviathan has, potentially could have been a pod hunting animal. Unlikely, because it is gigantic, and it's the largest marine mammal from the Miocene Pisco Formation in Peru. So it's unlikely, doing any cooperative hunting. It's possible, though, based upon what we know of modern toothed whale behavior. But it's possible. Most cetaceans are social animals. Killer whales, though, mostly do cooperative hunting because they're going after. Now, some go after larger prey. They'll eat on the Pacific coast. They'll eat gray whales. Actually, that's not true. They'll kill gray whales, drown them, and then eat the tongue, and then leave the rest of the animal to rot because they're gigantic cats. So yeah, it's pretty messed up. But then again, killer whales do also use cooperative hunting when they go after pinnipeds and smaller cetaceans. So it's not impossible. I would say it's a pretty even match. Macroevolutionarily speaking, however, one animal did win, and the giant killer sperm whales died out several million years before Carcharicles Megalodon did. So in a way, macroevolutionarily speaking, Carcharicles did win, but indirectly. And, it's not, so far, all of our truly gigantic sperm whales and records of the Leviathan are all from the southern hemisphere. Now there's records from Peru, obviously, South Africa. I want to say there might be a record from Chile or Argentina. And then there's a specimen that's still unpublished, but it's been widely posted on Twitter by folks at the at Museum Victoria in Melbourne, a specimen from Beaumaris in Australia. That's latest Miocene or earliest Pliocene in age. And it's a gigantic specimen the size of a 2-liter bottle. And my buddy Eric Fitzgerald is holding it and cradling it like his newborn child.
Like if
one tooth the size of a small baby. Actually, the size of a big baby. I take it back.